TBOT Show, episode 13. I'm Hakeem Anwar. Welcome back to Stories for Today, the future of the internet. It's more than just digital ID, it's more than age verification. There are a number of components to this system. In this new report I'm writing, I'm going to uncover it all. What countries are they mandatory in? What countries are they not? What is life like with and without digital ID? Because my friends, the digital fracturing is happening as we speak. Get a little sneak preview on today's show. Our second story is Google's antitrust decision. This was a fun one. For a long time, Google has been bullying. They have been bullying other tech companies through exclusive agreements within Android and search and throwing their money around so that other companies would comply with Google's monopoly. Then they got sued by dozens of attorney generals and were threatened to sell Android and Chrome browser as a remedy for the antitrust lawsuit. Now the judge has finally ruled. What has actually changed? Will Google stop bullying people? I don't know. Third story, well, I'll be damned. A scientist in the Southwest used piles of rocks and logs to restore some of the driest regions into green wetlands. And it was pretty simple what she did. Learn about her 20-year study and how we can restore our environment with just rocks and logs. And in our solution for the day, how can we overthrow Google Maps? Yes, they have too much power and it seems like only Google and Apple know where stuff are. I don't know where stuff is, I have to ask them. But hey, there's a new contender on the scene. StreetComplete is an app that crowdsources locations for use on open source maps. As always, this show is well researched, well informed, and focused on the most impactful stories while being concise. I promise we'll be within 20 minutes today. Plus, every show comes with solutions. Let's get on with the show. The future of the internet, my friends, may be in the hands of this thing. Yes, that is an amalgamation of international law frameworks, technical standards, and companies and regional authorities that are all working together to form a web of trust. They are all putting their efforts on coming up with decentralized identification schemes. Digital ID is becoming a reality, and I wanted to set my focus on really understanding it. How many companies are past their pilot programs and releasing their apps to the public, which we're starting to see this very year. And I wanted to answer the questions: how are they being rolled out? How is it going to change the internet? What are we going to do about it? So I'm working on a report called The Future of the Internet, a Global Digital ID Report. It's going to be available on abovephone.com. I'll have the link right below this, and you can sign up to download it when it's released, which I think will be next week. So first of all, digital ID, it's more than just the app that you're going to get on your phone. It's an entire ecosystem, it's a regulatory framework, and there's also functionality like your digital identity being able to be used to make e-signatures and documents like in the EU. Some countries like the UK with their program also have plans for single sign-ons. Think of it like when you're going to sign into a social media network or some other website and they say, would you like to log in with Google or Pinterest or whatever big tech platform they want to put on there? Well, now, the government. Would you like to sign in with the government? That will be one of the options, which is going to be kind of an awkward turtle situation when that starts becoming a thing. And the last component is guidance for corporations to implement these verification services themselves. So how to implement it properly, how to make sure you can't get frauded and people can't skirt their way around the digital ID. That's a very important part of it. So the internet is going to fundamentally change, much like we saw it change in the past 10 years, albeit due to scammers. which we saw things like the CAPTCHAs that popped up everywhere and the Cloudflare checks, just checking to make sure you're a real person. Well, we're going to have that again, except now it's going to be more formal and companies are going to have to comply according to their digital ID programs. Now, we're a few years away from this, but it's very, very strange, the hoops we're going to have to jump through just to use the internet. But hold on, you'll say, well, the governments, they always said that they would never force anything on you. It's not like they want to force things, and they're not so bad. In fact, it's prohibited by law in the EU and Australia that digital ID can't be forced on a person. It's forbidden to be mandatory. But these promises mean nothing, because this whole scheme is using a mandate by proxy setup, which means that they'll ensure that important industries must accept the wallet and provide guidance on how to do this, which is the case in the EU. There's a deadline for companies being able to provide the digital ID as a form of accepted login. And over time, these companies, because they're private, right, can make their own decisions of which login requirements they would like you to use. Or even other ways that you used to be able to log in could put their reliance on the digital ID itself. So it's kind of like a nested authentication system. That's very possible. Now, what happens when all of your basic social services and needs are going to be reliant on digital ID? Well, you can take a look at Pakistan, one of the oldest digital ID systems, which launched in 2001. It's called the NIDRA, Nadra, and you need this ID to do anything. Anything from getting a place to live, or getting on a plane, or even a bus, or even sending a package. This article I'm looking at here shows you, it's an interesting framing of the issue. The digital ID card keeps millions locked out. That's right, because Pakistan got 96% of people, according to them, to comply to this digital ID. Now, who's not in this system? Well, it's people who couldn't find their parents, which unfortunately is a common thing in Pakistan, or they're refugees from other countries. But these poor millions peoples, they still lack this CNIC, computerized national identity card, so they can't do basic things. And people are actually fighting to get access to this digital ID. This case here, a woman from Lahore who did not know her father and needed her father's birth certificate to prove her own identity to get one of these herself. And so she is basically living like a person off the grid. And so it's saying, hey, make the system more accessible. It's very sad that this person being locked out of society drove them to push to get the right to have their digital ID, when our focus should be on removing these restrictions of digital ID. It should be businesses not complying with this mandate. When I release the full report, I will have some solutions on things that we can start to do to be more resistant to digital ID, to form counter economic networks, all that sort of stuff. I'll remind you guys, go to abovephone.com/future of internet to get this full report. Who's the biggest bully in the playground? It's Google, and they have been beating up other big tech companies left and right. You may remember this lawsuit back in 2021 where many attorney generals in the US sued Google for essentially taking advantage of other big tech companies to reinforce their monopoly, whether it was bribes, threats, or coercion. They did anything in their power to remain the default. For instance, we all know Firefox gets the majority of their revenue, $500 million a year, because they make Google search the default search. And it's this power to remain the default that is so important from a user experience perspective. A customer will typically use whatever comes with the phone. I mean, you don't want to research and find something. It's already installed. You don't even know you can change it. And so Google saw how important this was and made sure to make deals that hinged on having Google Chrome and Google Search the default option on other phones such as Samsung and Chinese brands like Xiaomi and OnePlus, to ensure that Google was the default on there. They also did things to crush app stores and other assistants. And there's many more examples of this. I have a whole list. When Samsung wanted to make its Galaxy Store, Google basically pressured them and paid them off to neuter this alternative app store that people could use on Samsung phones. They also even went to app developers and bribed them to not publish on the Galaxy Store, which they can do through a number of different ways. Amazon's app store that ran on their smart devices also suffered a similar fate. I mean, Google was just flexing, man. Epic Games complained that Google shut 2 of their deals down where the game Fortnite would be pre-installed on OnePlus, and it did it again with LG. Fortnite's not even a competitor. It's a game that, you know, young people play. Google doesn't care. It's like, nah, we're the only people that can pre-install stuff on the phone. Chinese manufacturers struggled against Google's licensing deals similarly, OnePlus and Xiaomi, and now China, with the growing global tensions, has launched their own antitrust investigation against Google. Verizon accepted a search deal with Google, the telecom, without reviewing any competing offers that mandated Google search on Verizon phones. So there's all these different ways Google will embed itself to make sure it's top dog. Even smart speakers, man, where they were mandated to use Google search and Google Voice Assistant if they wanted to use any Google services whatsoever. So what is the decision? Well, here's what the judge ruled. He basically said these all or nothing deals where Google gets to impose that you use all their services and make them default cannot fly anymore. Now that gives the partners that they work with the ability to a la carte, so they can be like, we want the Google Play Store on our device, but we don't want to make Google Chrome the default browser. So having all of Google's suite installed is not required. They can't make deals or agreements where that is the case. Revenue sharing could not be limited because you don't install all their apps. Google, most really importantly, Google would not be forced to sell Chrome or Android. Whew! Google is like really happy about this one. Because that would have changed everything. That could have killed Firefox altogether. Now, Google can still pay other companies to preload or make default Google services. However, they can't make these contracts last for more than a year. So it's like a year-to-year renewal, but they can still do what they've been doing. They can still force a partner to be exclusive. They can still pay partners for pre-installing their apps and making them default. So how much changed really? Actually, what was the point of this whole lawsuit? But on the search side, now Google must give their qualified competitors, whatever that means, as the DOJ decides it, or whatever body oversees this, they must give rival access to their search index. That means their index of search results, so other companies can build their own searching service, but not have to show Google ads. Google does not have to. This was one of the main problems, right? This concept of a default browser or default search engine when you load up the phone and you load it. And I talked about this as such on TBOT episode 9, where the simplest solution to this entire problem, which would require very little work from anyone, it would just to change the design of Android. So when you launch it for the first time, hey, choose which browser you want to use. Choose which search engine you want to use. Here's all the search engines. Here's all the browsers. Wow, so easy. User choice, right? What a thing. But Google doesn't have to do this, because the judge thought that product design was a bit out of the scope of their decision, even though that would have been the best solution. I guess you can't get everything from a court decision. There's more things about Google doesn't have to give advertisers specific targeted data about ads, and they must disclose their ad auction. But with all of this being said, with this antitrust decision passing, the elephant in the room is Google took the most anti-competitive action as of recent, which was to ban alternative apps and side loading entirely unless the developer submits and hands their ID off to Google. Even though there's no monetary consequence of this, this is basically creating a choke point for any app that runs on an Android phone. This is a very interesting situation, and again, the digital fracturing is taking hold. The big tech players are continuing on their own way, and really I look to see other de-Googled or open source phone projects rise. And of course, we have Above Phone, which is based on Graphene OS. There's also a number of Linux phones that are trying more in putting out new updates that I'd like to cover. And heck, at a certain point, we might just have to carry around mini laptops, just little bloop, bloop. You can't get a digital ID on Linux, at least not yet anyways. So I think we'll have to look to even better solutions in the future. Well, I'll be damned. A government agency actually seems to be doing something reasonable to restore the environment. In the Chirachua Mountains of southeast Arizona, one of the most arid parts of the United States, a mountain range part of the Coronado Forest, lies a new effort by the United States Geological Service. And hold on, I know you're getting pissed, just wait. Hear me out here. These mountains are home to Sky Islands, isolated mountains that aren't really part of a range, they're on their own, covered with forest and biodiversity around the mountain. But as you move down the mountain, you see arid deserts below, devoid of water. These areas used to be ciénagas or desert marshes, and they've been eroded over time due to cattle farming and all the grass being eaten up. Now the scientists, as part of USGS, Laura Norman and her team are working on restoring them. But hold on, this is... Why am I even covering this? I thought I didn't like this stuff. Well, it's because they're not using a solution out of some sci-fi movie, like creating nanobots that drink up the water and put it back in the soil. They're using a solution that nature already figured out. So this area, it looks pretty nice and lush, but it wasn't always like that. Norman wasn't standing in a tropical paradise. In fact, her oasis was one of the driest, hottest regions in the world, and only a handful of years ago, this gully was virtually barren of plants. She has been studying watersheds, which is the path of water from the start of its journey all the way down into a larger body of water. She has been studying land use and saying that climate change is causing increasing desertification, which I disagree with, but hey, let's get to the solution of the story. But somehow she made this area lush, and it wasn't a crazy nanobot swarm or drone swarm that returned a bunch of water to the land. No, it was these things called natural infrastructure and dryland streams, which is a scientific term for these dam-like structures. Rather than completely block and hold the water, these structures slow the water down, similar to what nature does when a group of beavers get together and build a dam to catch fish, or rocks and logs which naturally find a smaller place in the river to just bunch up, and they block up the creek and they prevent stuff from getting through, which slows down the water. But a man-made structure that would mimic this is made out of a bunch of rocks encased within a wire mesh. Structures like here that we're seeing, the gully plug, gabion, and the rock dam slow the rate of water by more than half. In fact, this is another type of structure called the check dam, which seems to be made entirely out of rocks and is slowing down the water there. This is kind of what the area looks like, and here we can see a graphic that illustrates the beneficial effects of these NIDs, or natural dams. Now, there's all these different benefits that happen when the water is slowed down. One, because the rate of water is slow, it allows more water to soak into the soil and the riverbed and around it. The soil can actually go into the ground and support the vegetation around it. Also, because sediment is being loosely mixed up in this area where the dams are, it actually allows for the creation of soil. Let's read some of these. There's healthy vegetation is supported up and downstream from the structures. It prevents erosion and sediment transport, and hillsides are stabilized. And this is because normally when there's a big outpouring of rain, it will just flood the region entirely, and it'll move really fast, preventing water from getting into the ground, causing a lot of erosion and destruction. And then wetlands are formed from the soil, water, carbon sponges behind the structures. So this biomass that forms behind the dam. And yeah, and so these are all seem to be good things besides the whole obsession with carbon. So that's kind of the beneficial effects of these structures according to the study. And they did a study near the Sonora Desert, near the US-Mexico border, and they studied the effects of the gabions. I know that's not how you pronounce it, but I just like saying that. It sounds French. And this is a type of nid structure, and they were looking at the effect of vegetation over from 1984 to 2010. And so they were charting the growth of the vegetation using this thing called the NDVI, Normalized Difference Vegetation Index, which is just a way to judge how much plant biomass is in the area. And in this time of about 20 years, they built 46 loose rock wire gabions in one check dam. So that's kind of the effects they were looking at. And so, as you can see, when the precipitation went down over time, does seem like there's less precipitation in the area. The areas that were untreated also got drier, versus the treated areas were able to maintain their relative biomass, which really should tell you something. So the best solution that these scientists from the government could have done is to not make their own solution and just look at nature, which is how permaculture works. Yet another positive solution that gives me a little bit of hope, but who knows? I'm not a permaculturist or an expert in geology, so maybe someone will tell me that this is wrong and all the greenery is actually bad for the environment. I don't know, but a simple structure, a simple technology of rocks encased in a wired mesh for dry areas seems like a good thing to try out, and it will take a pretty long period of time to see the effects, but it is one worth trying in a world that is fighting to keep its water. That is it for our positive stories for today. Have you ever wished you knew where businesses were, and that you didn't have to go to Google Maps or Apple Maps or Yahoo Maps or whatever the hell you use to find addresses online? Well, me too. And inside the de-Googled ecosystem, there aren't that many solutions. But when I was traveling in the UK a few years ago, I noticed that OpenStreetMaps, the open source mapping solution, had the location of every business nearby. It didn't even have the tiny kiosks in the alleyways and on the street. And I was just chuckled by that. I was wondering how the Europeans were ahead of the Americans. And I figured out the answer recently is that they care about supporting these open source mapping infrastructures and getting rid of Google and Apple's monopoly by using this app called StreetComplete, which is a way to crowdsource and contribute to OpenStreetMaps. So our solution for StreetComplete today actually comes from one of my earlier webinars on open source navigation. And so the clip is going to change a little bit, but if you want to check out the full webinar, you can do so on learn.abovephone.com, where I go into the history of GPS mapping and how you can completely navigate offline using a de-Googled phone. You should also check that out. Let's get into the clip though.
Let's go on a quest to complete the streets with StreetComplete. So let me open up StreetComplete here. It's gonna use my location. Where am I even? There we are, I'm over here. I'm still in Nashville. And what this does is you get put into, you get put on the street and you receive quests for incomplete information nearby. I really love this. I really love how awesome this interface is and how easy it's made. So I could be in Nashville right now and it could ask me things like, here, let's click on this quest. What's this pole made of? Wood, steel, or concrete? I don't know why that's so important, but look at the level of detail. That's pretty interesting. And then you can answer, you can give your feedback. One thing to mention is that you do need to create an account with OpenStreetMaps. In order to do this, I'm kind of just giving you a demo of what it's like. what I would say, what I think is the most helpful for me personally, because I've used these maps a lot, is to figure out the addresses, the house numbers. Like, what is the house number of this building? And maybe it's not so important for individual houses. Maybe you want to do your own house. I don't know. It's totally up to you. It's your prerogative. But at least the buildings and stuff, right? People expect to be able to navigate the buildings and things in town and public centers. I think that's the most helpful thing to contribute to OpenStreetMaps. But as you can see, there are a lot of things that you can contribute. That's pretty cool how it tracks my path. I'm gonna see if I can find an icon that hasn't showed up. So it's got me like boxed into this region. It's got power poles, it's got roads. What is this? What is the name of the street? See, it's exactly stuff like this that is so important. It doesn't even know the names of these streets. Someone tell it the names of these streets so we can get there. All right, that's pretty cool. So there's street addresses, and there's also new streets that are being developed. OpenStreetMaps isn't going around in driverless cars and collecting all the Wi-Fi networks and surveilling it. It's we have to support it in this way if we want an alternative. And so I encourage you to do so. I'm motivated to do so myself. I'm going to start contributing wherever I go, wherever I travel. I'm going to be contributing to StreetComplete.
And so that's it for all the stories today on TBOT 13. Let me close with some announcements. Well, one is the new episode of Source Insights is coming out this week. Source Insights is my personal reflections on philosophy, spirituality, and energetic technology. This week, I'm going to be talking about the one health decision I made that turned my life 180 degrees around when it came to my energy and mental well-being. You're definitely going to want to see that. I'm also going to talk about some energetic technology that I experienced that went all the way down to letting me observe what was going on in my cells. And so, yeah, you're not going to want to miss it. It's only available to paid subscribers. You subscribing ensures that we can do free TBOT content. So I want to give you some goodies your way if you're a subscriber of Source Insights. Check that out. Become a paid subscriber. As always, if you like the TBOT show, let me know in the comments, what did you think of today's stories? Did you learn something new? Do you have questions for me that I should answer on a later show? I would love to hear from you. And with that, TBOT 13 is a wrap. Always remember, our connection is sacred. Peace.